So I think there's a lot of potential here in addition to, the basics of how AI can help our organizations run. So I'm just going to go along and have folks explain. I'm going to start with Trey, and they'll each tell you who they are, or who they work for, and why they're here. Why are you sitting on this panel? Trey, would you like to start us off?
Sure, thank you very much. So yeah, I'm Trey Causey. I lead Responsible AI at Indeed, which is the world's largest job matching platform. I'm also part of our environmental, social, and governance leadership team, and one of the company owners of our goal to help 30 million job seekers facing bias and barriers get hired by 2030. So all of this is kind of like my sweet spot in terms of what we're going to be talking about today and how we're thinking about, I really liked how Angela put it, because it's very similar to how I talk about it, kind of getting in front of how AI is being deployed and developed. And I think that this is a really pivotal moment that we're in right now for changing the direction of technological development rather than trying to correct previous directions, as we seem to so often find ourselves doing. So really excited to engage with the rest of the panel. Who am I and why am I here? I think I covered both of those. Okay, great. So I will pass it over to Victor.
Thanks, Trey. Victor Villegas, Broadband and Digital Technologies Adoption Coordinator at Oregon State University. I have a dual appointment with Extension, which is the public-facing side of the university, as well as the university IT, so centrally funded. And this is a statewide position, working with communities, organizations, local government on broadband and digital equity issues. But most people know me as Drone Singer online, the Weird Al of drones. I make parody songs about drones and use the arts to engage K through 12 youth, especially underserved, underrepresented youth, for those kids that might not naturally gravitate towards STEM, and AI is one of the tools that I'm using to engage them. So I'm here because Angela asked me to be here as a representative of someone that's actually doing the work out in the communities.
Thank you, Victor. Amina.
Hi, my name is Amina Fezlullah, and I work with Common Sense Media. I'm the head of tech policy advocacy. Common Sense Media is an organization that is focused on supporting kids and families and educators with information as they use media and technology. We're best known for our ratings and reviews of media and ed tech products that face kids and educators, but we're also known for our research, and we also do advocacy work based off of what we learn from our research and our engagement with teachers and families. We build a portfolio of policy recommendations that we push forward in both Congress at the federal level and then also in states. And lastly, we build digital literacy materials. And so our education team has built out digital citizenship curriculum that's used in, I think, close to 80% of Title I schools across the country. And that curriculum has recently been updated to focus on AI as well. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you to talk about the types of tools that we have available.
And we should note, Amina is a founding NDIA board member, just rolled off. Luke, you're up next. Luke's very popular.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Luke Swarthout. I'm chief of staff at a small education nonprofit called Innovate EDU. We tackle thorny problems in the K-12 education space by bringing together leaders and organizations to identify gaps and try and pursue solutions. So we do work on things like data interoperability of education technology. We work on a project to support the president's call for 250,000 additional caring adults in K-12 schools as high-impact tutors and mentors. And we convene an organization, a community called the EdSafe AI Alliance, which is more than 20 organizations committed to responsible guidelines and guardrails to help us use AI technology in a safe, accountable, fair, and effective way in our school districts around the country. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that work later. I should also say I previously spent 10 years at the New York Public Library, where I oversaw our adult ed work, including technology training across the Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island. And as a part of that, lent 10,000 Wi-Fi hotspots with colleagues across the city about 10 years ago, which was how I first got involved in digital equity and actually met Angela and joined the board of NDIA. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Luke. Let's start with Victor. Victor, as someone who is an affiliate of NDIA and works in the community, when you're talking to community members, how do you explain AI?
I just do it at the basic level, which is basically AI is tools programming that is made to mimic human intelligence, so artificial intelligence, because it's not real. And this, at the basic level, is just trying to mimic what we do as human beings.
Great, thank you. Amina, what would you add to that? And can you tell us a little bit about the materials that Common Sense has?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I would just add is, and I would welcome anybody else from the panel to add to the sort of like, what is AI discussion, but is that we're in an interesting moment. A lot of our AI tools are things that we've already experienced before. So like you might not realize it, but you've been using AI when you've got, you've used search within Google and they've given you like a potential search query for you. You probably used AI if you're using Zoom and it's getting rid of background noise. Right, like there's lots of different tools that already use artificial intelligence, but part of what brings us to the podium today is generative AI and the ability to sort of take all this information across the internet, plug it in to this model, this computer algorithm, and then spit out original and new work. And what's interesting is that it can be done with using like language like humans use, right? So it's like very conversational. It could be done using like artistic work. So like something that we've sort of thought is really the domain of humans, but like now we can see like images that are generated that like look like artistic work that humans have done. So like I think that's what kind of brings us to the table is that like, oh, this is really different and new in terms of a use of AI. Like we might have been using this technology before, but now I think we're experiencing, the reason you're hearing the buzz is because we're experiencing this sort of new use of it.
Yeah, and the free materials that Common Sense has, can you explain what you guys have and where you've shared those?
Yeah, so if you all go onto Sketch, you'll see that there's a PowerPoint and there are various materials on there. And a few of the materials that we've developed at Common Sense are available. And one of them, I'll start with, is our ratings and reviews of AI products. Our bailiwick is focusing on products that are going to engage with kids and teachers and families. So that's the lens that we use this. But I still think it's a really valuable lens for any digital navigator in the room because there really isn't a lot of ratings and reviews of AI products. The reason for that is a lot of these products are brand new. Even our ratings and reviews, the day that we released it, there are other AI products that are being released that same day. So it's not all encompassing, but it is something we plan to do periodically. And our hope is that, you'll be able to get a sense of like, what are those sort of the privacy ratings there? Like, what are the integrity concerns that may be there? Is this generally safe to use? So if you go onto our website, you'll see our AI ratings and reviews, and that tool can be a good way of sort of just understanding like, okay, what are the risks that might come along with using this product? So that you have a better sense of what you're engaging in before you actually engage in use of AI. The other tool that we've got is, like I said, our digital citizenship curriculum. We just created new curriculum that focuses in on using AI. And it really is about sort of the ethics of AI. So this is pretty introductory stuff. It's designed for grades 6 through 12. And so, again, it's designed for students. It's designed for a younger audience. I would suggest to any digital navigator in the room to take a look at it and see if you can crib off of it. It may not necessarily fit in with your community or audience like right on point, but a lot of the definitions, a lot of the information, a lot of the questions that are raised, I think could still be useful. And, we really welcome anybody taking advantage of these resources and making it your own for your own community. There are videos, there are slide decks. They step through in like really short buckets, so it's like 20 minutes or less, like each lesson. So those are really great tools to kind of use. And I would really welcome anybody reaching out directly to me to say, like, if there are other points that you would like to see, like what would the next iteration, the next set of lessons, what should it include, especially for the digital navigator community represented here, right? Like if there are anyhow, questions or anything else that you would like to sort of see, or different types of mediums that you would like these lessons in, like I would be really interested in hearing about that as well. Those are the two, I think, tools that we have available right now that I would really like to lift up.
Great, thank you, Amina. So I'm very excited about the training that Common Sense has. In the digital equity field, we often struggle with training materials that are up to date. With AI, there's the potential for that material to become out of date. Whew. Like keeping it up to date is going to be hard. And Common Sense is a place that is committed to this, that is trusted by all of us. So the fact that they have chosen to do this is really reassuring for those of us who are always looking for training materials that we know we can trust. So cribbing off of them is a fabulous idea. Just checking back often to see if Common Sense has updated their materials, because then you would need to update your materials. Okay, Trey, we're going to move to you. This community, as you've probably noticed, cares a lot about equity. So can you talk to us a bit about the serious challenges associated with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also concerned with this topic. Also, I'm here. So I think it's, fundamentally, as Victor said, these are models and algorithms that are designed by humans. They're built using data, often that was generated by humans, text and images and so on. And you may have noticed by living in the world that humans are biased in many ways and produce those biases in the kinds of data that they produce, in terms of the words they use, in terms of the images they use. And so all of that gets encoded into these artificial intelligence systems in a way that can be reproduced, amplified, recombined, and used to output what are not only kind of like quite obviously bad things, but also quite subtly pernicious things as well, in terms of providing access to individuals to economic opportunity, employment, housing, credit, and kind of many other domains of life as well. And so one of the big challenges here is not only keeping up with how fast the domain is moving, but also making sure that we have people who are thinking critically and responsibly and interdisciplinarily, if that's a word, about how we can kind of bring different fields together and bring our expertise together to design these systems in a more responsible way. And so I think, I'll probably say this a few times, but one of the things that I'm most excited about right now as someone who's worked in kind of machine learning and AI for more than a decade, is that this is a chance for us kind of on the ground floor to say, how do we want to deploy this technology? How do we want to deploy this for the benefit of society rather than watching it kind of happen to us in a way? So like taking advantage of this highly agentic moment where we can have agency and influence how things play out is really important. Now, that being said, I don't want to be up here overly optimistic and say like, oh, if we just try hard, we're going to solve it, because humans are biased in lots of ways, and humans have a lot of terrible beliefs across many times and places. And so it's not a, hey, let's fix it and then AI will be good. It's going to be a constant kind of intervention. It's going to be a constant way of thinking about how to build technology responsibly. And so in that sense, like, I'm optimistic by how many people are here and how many people have expressed interest in this topic to take part in those discussions, to take part in developing those principles. I think there's a lot of regulatory movement going on as well right now. But I mean, I think fundamentally, to Angela's point and to Amina's point about education, I have a hard time keeping on top of the space, and this is like literally what I do every day for a living for a long time. But what I don't think is going to go out of style is asking good questions and knowing what kinds of questions to ask of the people that you're working with, who are providing services and tools that you're going to use, and empowering those who you are teaching to ask those questions as well. And I think there's a lot of power in being able to ask questions that you can tell when someone answers those questions if they have an answer to that question or not. And so, you may not even know the correct answer to that question sometimes, I find, but just even asking the question is a good way to provide signal on how responsibly people are thinking about it. And so, in that sense, I think a big lesson for living in a world with AI and being a responsible consumer of AI is knowing the questions to ask.
Does anyone want to add to this issue of concerns?
I can add to the concerns issues. I think one of the concerns that we have is, like you said, AI generates answers based off of what it's been trained on. What's the data that's gone into it? And that data is just like whatever's on the internet, right? And we already know, everybody in this room already knows, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's biased, that's not great. And so, I think it's important for us to realize that like the answers that are going to come out could be really great, but could take this biased information and spit out a biased answer. And so I think that there is like a need for us to just all be aware that like there's value in asking more of the folks who are building these models, right? Like it's okay to say, to the folks that are building GPT, whatever number we're at it now. When you build this model, like these are the limiters we want in place. These are the concerns we have around civil rights or around misinformation, disinformation. Like here are our concerns, and then making sure that whoever uses those models, all of the applications that are like facing us, right, like ChatGPT. Making sure that they also put limiters in place. Because I think what's a little bit concerning to me is that oftentimes with technology, especially with something that spits out something that seems so authoritative and so fancy and so well done, we sort of assume that like it's already safe and that there's all sorts of protections in place. And so, I think it's important for us to realize this stuff is pretty new, and those limiters and those types of guidelines aren't really in place yet. And so as we use this, I think we're going to encounter, moments where we're like, that's not what I was expecting, and that's totally possible. So I think it's really important for all of us just to be aware of like how new this product actually is and what that means in terms of sort of safety and your experience.
Thank you, Amina. Luke, can you add to that?
Actually, do you mind if we take a pulse of where like the room is on some of the things?
We're supposed to do that at the beginning.
No, it's okay. So, but just on this one. So 3 options, like I'm feeling blank about AI, and we're gonna do a show of hands. Like I'm feeling optimistic, I'm feeling kind of in the middle, I'm feeling concerned. So pick one of the 3. That's kind of, I know that's hard, but like everybody who's feeling kind of concerned about AI, like would you mind raising your hands? Okay. Everybody who's feeling kind of like a little bit in the middle about AI. And like, who's feeling optimistic about AI? That's like about a third. Like that's all right.
Yeah, a third for each one.
I'm on a roll. Do you mind if I ask the second set of questions? I'm feeling good about this. All right. Just second question. Like, I know, same thing. I know a lot about AI. I know some about AI. I know a little bit about AI, just so that we can kind of, again, take the, so if I know a little bit about AI, or I'm still, I'm just starting out, like raise your hands. I know a little bit about AI. Excellent. I feel like I know kind of medium about AI, like show of hands on medium. And then people are feeling really confident. I've looked into this, I know a lot about AI. Wow. Okay. Good. So that's helpful for us to kind of know the thing. Here would be a thought I have about kind of concerns and this community. So I think the kind of the rhythms of AI around digital equity are playing out in very familiar ways for all of us. And so if you're just starting out on AI, but you've been working around connectivity issues in your community, or you've been working around digital skills issues in your community, or accessibility issues, like you actually kind of know quite a bit, right? Digital inequity manifests because these new technological systems are built off of old technological systems, and a bunch of those were unequal. So if you build your AI system off of the content on the web, like you're embedding inequalities on that. And these new technology systems have costs associated with them. And actually AI under the hood is quite an expensive, it's quite expensive to generate those ChatGPT answers. OpenAI even probably subsidizes them heavily for folks. So cost creates inequities. And then AI intersects with other inequities in our society. So if you struggle with basic literacy, you're going to struggle with computer literacy. So I think one of the ways I think about it is, and one of the reasons I think this is a community that's actually well poised to sort of do something about AI is we have all spent, you know, however long you've been working on this, you've been preparing for this AI moment, you know, your entire digital inclusion careers. And sort of as Amina was foreshadowing, like rarely do you have a moment in the sort of early birth of a technology, and I think Trey said this too, to kind of intervene to shape its trajectory. And I think we should as a community figure out our place at the conversation and our place at the table, but I think, you know, we have a lot of expertise to bring to that, and a lot of insights, and I'm actually somewhat optimistic in that sense about our ability to ameliorate some of its worst harms.
Thank you. Victor.
So, as you said, Angela, this is a very disruptive technology, more so than any other type of technology, to the point where white-collar jobs are going to be impacted, and they have a possibility of falling behind and being on that digital divide, along with everyone else who's already been on there. That's how disruptive this technology is. And that's what people a lot are scared of. You know, is it going to replace me? Is it going to replace our jobs? Bottom answer, yes and no. It's going to replace those people who don't take the time to learn these technologies, these capabilities, and leverage that to help them increase their capabilities in providing their services and improving their work, right? If you just want to stick your head in the sand and say, I don't want anything to do with it, that digital divide is going to put you farther behind even than where people are right now. And that's including people in white-collar jobs. However, if you embrace your humanity, which is something that these technologies have a really hard time doing, empathy, our feelings, our emotions, right? Our humanity, our creativity is what will actually allow us to work hand in hand with these technologies for the betterment of humanity. But we have to be in those discussions, like Luke says. And this is the opportunity right now. We're at the very forefront of this technology. We should be in those discussions and saying, okay, who are the communities that this technology are affecting? It's affecting everyone, but it's going to affect people who are already behind even more so at a very higher rate. I mean, many of us are just barely teaching people how to access a computer and turn it on. This is levels above that. And you have to be looking at computers. I mean, how many have seen Apple's vision, spatial computing? Computers as we know them is going away. You're not going to have a laptop. You're not going to have a device. It's going to be here in 3D space. It's kind of like Minority Report, right? This is already happening. And if you don't have those skills and that training and that knowledge, boy, you're really going to suffer.
It sounds very similar to what we already do. Yeah?
Right.
So if we're teaching folks how to use a browser, we're going to teach folks how to use AI. And I think the difference now is that all of us need to make a decision about ourselves using it. Right? I have people in my world who are like, too many biases, too many harms, I'm not going to do it. How would any of you respond to that person? I know it's a hard one. Who wants it?
I'll take first crack at that.
Thanks, Trey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I would say is that I have a slightly optimistic answer that incorporates part of this, which is like one of the nice things about all these devices going away, I think, is that interacting with technology is going to look more like interacting with the environment around you and people around you, like natural, like talking to a computer in a way that I'm talking to you right now that will produce outputs rather than me like, okay, I need to go to the file menu and remember how to export as a PDF. Like, you just say like, I need a PDF, and that kind of happens. So I'm actually kind of optimistic about that. So I would say overlooking that ability to close some of the divides would be one thing that I would say to people, that there is actually potential here for making this more accessible, even though it sounds scarier and more technologically advanced and so on. But I would also say, like, it's a societal and technological process that's unfolding. And like any collective process, all of us have both an individual component in it and we have a collective component in it. And I think that for people who opt out, that may be at some point a privilege that one could exercise. For instance, like opting out of social media or something like that. But I think for many people, it's going to be, well, I can't hire you unless you can use these tools. And so therefore, like I'm gonna have to pass. And so I think that treating it as a tool, treating it as something that's in the world that you're going to be working with, like instead of ignoring it is probably the right approach. And to your point, and our kind of continuing point, like we can change how that conversation happens rather than just saying like, here's an incredibly authoritarian surveillance-driven tool that you now must use. Like, well, if we have those conversations now, maybe that's not the future that we're looking at. But I do think if you just opt out at this point, that's actually more likely to transpire than a more positive future that incorporates all of our kind of viewpoints.
Perfect. Thank you, Trey. Luke.
Yeah. I think also the idea that you can engage in the internet but opt out of AI is probably like that's a false choice. Like you can choose not to use a ChatGPT program right now, but underpinning much of the technology that we use already is going to be artificial intelligence. And in the same way that at the library we used to teach people HTML and CSS classes so they understood that the digital technologies that they encountered were the intentional choices of a designer and thus kind of better understood the world that they existed in, we're going to need to teach people about AI so they understand the world that they're existing in, whether they sort of choose to ever use an image generator or not. And I guess if I go back to that same question, like I've heard that before, right? I've heard like, why do I need an email address? And you know, for a while you didn't, and then you did in order to access benefits or in order to do something else. And I think we're, as a sector, quite good at hand-holding people through the challenges, not because we're promoting it, not because we're advocates of the sort of widespread use of it, but because we understand its importance and integration into society, and we're navigators, right? I mean, it's in the metaphor.
Right.
Can I do one?
Yeah, no, please.
I had a boss who was a chief digital officer at the New York Public Library, and he used to say that he had digital in his title the way that firefighter had fire in his title, right? He wasn't there to spread it, right? He was there to understand it and make sure it was employed appropriately. Like, I think I'm on this panel to talk about AI and digital equity. Like, AI is like fire. Like, it's there, it's in our environment, it's around us. It has the possibility for heat and light and warmth, and it also has the possibility to burn some stuff up. And I think we're in a couple of different ways in a place of trying to sort of shape that future. But that means kind of understanding it and engaging with it appropriately and not kind of denying its existence.
So I think that means we need to address the safety aspect of AI. There are harms that can occur. Generative AI likes to make stuff up. This can cause harms. It often doesn't recognize faces of color and cultural issues that are not, mainstream white kind of culture. So how do we understand those, yet still use the tool? Who wants this one? Amina?
I'll start with this. So I think, what can we do right now when it comes to safety? And I think that's knowledge, and that's where everybody in this room becomes so critically important. And if you're wondering what is it that I'm going to be connecting somebody to, what kind of information? This is really critical information, because, like I said, these products are really slick, and so it's really important for people to understand that they can mess up. And that it's really important for them to say, okay, I can ask ChatGPT a question, and it'll generate an answer in the form of an essay in this really conversational way, and it'll be really great. Could I just copy and paste that and then send it off? And it's it could feel like that. It looks authoritative, it looks right, but you really got to check your sources. So this kind of safety information, I think, is really important. Like, I don't know that we've had tools similarly to the internet where we've talked about misinformation and disinformation and how to consume media and be like an aware media consumer on the internet. This is similar. Like, when you're using generative AI, I think we're going to need digital navigators to say, like, here are things that you need to be aware of. It could spit out a right answer. It could spit out a completely wrong answer. It could hallucinate. It could give you false, completely made up source, right? So like, these are possibilities. It's important to just arm anyone that you are engaging with this information so they're like, okay, this is how I approach the answers that are going to be generated.
So Trey mentioned earlier needing to ask the right questions. Trey, can you give us some suggestions of, I guess I'm going to ask you two, part A, part B. As we are learning about AI, questions we should be asking, and then how do we guide, so if you're a digital navigator, how are you guiding that question asking in your community?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think some overarching questions you can always ask if you're talking to a provider of an AI service or a vendor or a product. You can always ask, like, how are your products evaluated for biases? What are your safety precautions that you take? How do you think about things like hallucinations or confabulations and so on? And again, like, they may try and wow you with a technical little jargony response involving things like retrieval augmented generation and things like this, but like, what you're actually looking for is that they've thought about it and they are taking steps. That's no guarantee that those are going to be sufficient steps, but it's a first step. I think the next thing is, asking about compliance with, relevant regulations and laws. This is a very fast-moving space. There actually aren't that many laws right now, even though you're hearing about a bunch of them, particularly in the EU, but there are a bunch likely coming this year. I think a third thing you can ask is, what do they have any public-facing commitments they've made to developing AI responsibly? For instance, Indeed has our own responsible AI principles that we've posted publicly and have committed to internally, and so you can kind of look and see how they're making decisions about those things. You can ask if they audit their products for bias and safety concerns as well. So there are a number of and these are actually these are not AI specific, right? These are the kind of questions you would ask a vendor in general, like, is your product legal? How often does it check for legality? And so on. And so do you have a team that's responsible for making sure that it's not terrible? And so I think that arming yourself with the questions that you want to know the answer to are likely the right questions that you should be asking vendors as well. Now, I think, you're going to get to a stage where likely there's a nascent industry right now of organizations that can help you evaluate vendors, like Amina's organization as well, that can help you evaluate products. And I think those are absolutely critical, and so you should be relying on those. Also, it's a fast-moving space, as Amina said, so I think it's a necessary but not sufficient, likely, way to equip yourself with that knowledge. So that's what I would ask for people in this room, is to start asking all the questions Angela's asking us, you should be asking of your vendors, basically. Now, as far as as you pass that information on to your communities and how you think about socializing that as well, I think there are a lot of great points that have been raised already, which is you need to empower people to be responsible consumers of these tools. And so that means not trusting uncritically the output. That means verifying output. That means if you feel like this is something that you couldn't say yourself, you shouldn't then pass it on as your own work. And in some ways, that's kind of like getting back to grade school plagiarism norms. It's kind of like, if this isn't your thinking and you don't know where it came from, you shouldn't be passing it off as your own knowledge. And so I think just, letting people know this is just a way to get information. You have to verify it. It may shorten some of the more tedious processes you're engaged in, or it may help you practice, do things, practice the wording of things, edit, brainstorm, stuff like that. At the end of the day, it can't replace your original thinking. It can't replace your decision making. You're kind of still responsible for those things. One thing I think that's maybe important to point out about the kind of misinformation and technology point too is it's pretty interesting. Can we indulge me for 1 sec on this? So we talk a lot about hallucinations. So just in case you don't know, hallucinations are the idea that these AI models can produce very convincing sounding outputs and texts that are not true at all. In fact, may contain names that are not true,
sources that are.
Yeah, exactly. We can ask it, who was the keynote speaker at NDIA 2026, and it might say Trey Causey was the keynote speaker, even though it hasn't happened yet, and I am not the keynote speaker, as far as I know, for NDIA 2026. And so the reason that happens is the way these models are built is that they're trained to be as much like human output as possible. And so in a way, that makes it very easy to feel convincing because that's literally the goal. What you don't realize is this has been happening your whole life with AI, right? Like, you don't know when you go to Google, is that third search result, should that be number 4 or should that be number 3? And AI made that decision, an AI system made that decision, but you can't really evaluate it because it's kind of behind the scenes and you can't evaluate how the decision was made. But text that you can read and say, well, I know that's not true, you now have the ability to individually, as a person, evaluate the errors and the performance of a system in a way that was completely impossible before. So in that sense, like, yes, it's dangerous. Yes, there are harms that can emerge from that, but it also provides you with some new power that you didn't have before, which is you're actually able to interrogate the outputs of these systems in a way that you couldn't previously.
Perfect. Thank you, Amina.
And I don't know if this is the right moment to talk policy, but like,
Go ahead.
when it comes to safety, I think that a lot of us sort of assume, okay, well, there's got to be like a law or something that's like protecting me. And when it comes to data privacy and it comes to platform responsibility, we're still pretty behind. And so there's been a lot of buzz about the federal government wanting to do a lot on AI, and states are introducing laws, but it's all relatively new and it hasn't really moved forward yet. And so, we're still relying on privacy laws that are quite outdated when it comes to data privacy, especially when it comes to kids' data privacy. We're still relying or lacking like duties of care in this country when it comes to like social media, let alone AI. So like the presumption of like, okay, well, if something harmful happened to me, like I've got recourse. Like I'm not quite sure that we've got the recourse that you might think you have. And so I think that's something also to keep in mind. But it's also an opportunity because I think there is a lot of interest like among policymakers to actually like take steps. So right now, what do we have on the table? Like the biggest thing we have on the table is the president's executive order, and that like largely is trying to shape how the federal government uses AI. And you may at first blush think like, oh, that's not really going to impact me very much. But those are your enforcement agencies, right? So like some of the bad outcomes of AI being used poorly by enforcement agencies really impact civil rights issues, like at a core level, right? So like it is actually kind of important for this community to be engaged in some of this work with policymakers because like you represent the people that would be experiencing the bad outcomes of a government entity using AI inappropriately. So the EO, or the executive order, is actually like a really great place to start because it does start to consider like how these like big institutions might be using AI. Now that doesn't impact like the consumer's use of ChatGPT, but I think like states are starting to look into that, and like it's just starting to happen. So I guess like my short warning is like there probably are less consumer protections in place when you're using these products than you probably expect. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you use them.
Thank you. Victor, did you want to jump in on the conversation?
Yeah, so Trey was talking about the outputs, right? Not being able to trust them. And then Amina talked about data privacy. So security issues. What about the stuff you put into these systems, right? Because the reason these exist is because you're using huge data sets of information. Well, guess what else is being used by the AI? It's that information that you're putting into, and you're training it by putting that information that's going up into a cloud that is now being accessed by someone else that also has access to that engine, right? So we have to think about ways of maybe mitigating some of that. Is there information that you don't want to get out there? Proprietary information, private information, medical information. They're developing systems that you can run in-house, right? And it never goes out into the internet. It's all localized, and you can, train it for that. So that's one way of mitigating that. But you have to be aware of these systems. These systems work. The more data, the better. And so if you have it internally, it's not as much data, it might not be as accurate. So you have to weigh the pros and cons, the risk factor, right? But this is some of the trainings that you have to talk as a digital navigator, okay? Here's the pros, here's the cons. Do you use it for this, don't use it for that, right?
Yeah, and specifically on that point, like if you were to enter in information, one of the privacy concerns that was like personal information, it may not be like, all the details, like actual, like personally identifiable information, However, there's some concerns that like with enough interaction with AI, you may have given it enough information that it can sort of like figure out how to like break or de-anonymize. So I think, again, for the folks in the room, what's really useful is to be able to sort of say like, okay, when you use this, be mindful of what you're putting in, because we're not exactly sure like how private this data is going to be once it enters into the system.
I would concretely add there for digital navigators that you should always check the settings for the tools that you're using. So for instance, like ChatGPT does have an option that you can check to say, don't use my data to improve or train future models, and you can turn that on. So it's always important to be like a responsible consumer of the settings you're using and show people how to disable those things. Of course, they will never be the default, so you'll almost always have to turn them off, just so you know, but that is an option. And one other just point, which hopefully is not overly pedantic, I do want to like caution against phrases like the AI will figure out how to de-anonymize you, or will, so it's like there is no thinking involved. Like it's like a pattern matching model underneath. That's a probabilistic model, so there's no like intent. And so I think often when we anthropomorphize these systems, we end up giving them more agency than they actually do, and it kind of takes the focus away maybe from how we can affect them, but that's just my point of
And if you haven't played with the AI tools that Dell has here, I encourage you to do that. We asked Dell to do that. They didn't come to us suggesting that. We said, because they said, can we do something? And we said, we'd really like folks to be able to test and play around with some AI tools in a safe place with someone who can answer their questions. And they said, we think we can do this. So those AI navigators over there are those folks are with HopeWorks. It's a nonprofit organization. And this is what they do. It's one of the things that they do, which your organization may want to do some of the things HopeWorks does. I think they're just a little further ahead than most in the digital equity field. So we have a lot to learn just from them also. We're going to take a few questions, so get your questions ready. But first, I want to turn to Luke. And Luke's in the education field. I'm learning a lot from the education field thanks to some of the work that his organization is doing. So Luke, what can we learn from education right now?
Yeah, so one of the projects that we're doing at the EdSafe AI Alliance is working with 12 school districts around the country to build local AI policy labs. So these districts, ranging from like the largest district in the country to small rural districts, are wrestling right now with the real-time application of AI in everything from the classroom to their procurement practices, the struggles that parents are having with AI. And the only condition for participation in this cohort is that they share all their policies open source, open science, so they can be in dialogue with other schools and they can share them with the larger community. And the only thing I would say is, these are districts that are kind of running towards the problem because although a minority of their teachers are using it, almost all of their students on surveys are using AI tools. And I think that's like a really instructive challenge we have, which is even if like not everybody in this room is using it, like many of the people who are coming into our programs or certainly their children are encountering these technologies. And I think that's I think a useful lesson from the sort of education field, and frankly, parents are an entirely separate. Some of our systems are only focused in the near term on the challenges that parents are going to have, and I think that's an identical population to the one that many of our organizations serve.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Luke. Okay, questions? Okay, we got lots of questions. We have 2 microphone stands, so let's go, if you want to come up to the microphone stands. I know we were moving mics earlier, but let's use the stands, and then we'll just go back and forth between the 2 stands. So we'll start over here, please.
Hi, hello. Okay, hi. I'm Elizabeth with Mission Telecom. My question or my concern is basically with the governance. And so you touched a lot of that on how can we build as a community the AI tool that works for us as opposed to always be pushing back on companies trying to embed some human-centered policies, which, as we've learned with social media, doesn't work because it hurts the bottom line, or trying to keep up with policies policymakers when they focus on once the harm is done? Can we build AI that works for us, open source? Like, have you thoughts on that?
Yes. I'm going to give a thought, and then I'm going to turn to whoever wants to jump in. One of the opportunities I think this community has is to influence the development and the policies. As I'm out learning about AI, I keep hearing, well, we need to make sure that community is present in development. We need to make sure, diverse voices are present in development. We need to make sure diverse voices are present in policymaking. And in my mind, I'm thinking, where are you finding these people? I don't know enough to be in any of those rooms. Do any of you feel comfortable being in those rooms, representing that voice? So our opportunity, I think, is that we could be the ones who say, I could actually be in that room, but we're going to have to prepare ourselves and the folks that we serve so they can come into that room with that lived experience and the knowledge to be able to talk the same language as those who are building AI tools and setting policies for AI tools. Anybody want to follow that up? Luke?
Yeah, it's frankly a brilliant question and entirely timely. Like, what does public infrastructure look like in AI? Because everything we're building, if you're building anything, is atop a Microsoft or a Google or an OpenAI model, and those are for-profit companies with their own prerogatives. And there are people out there who are asking these questions in individual sectors in a larger space, and it's a conversation we should be a part of. But I think that's a reasonable reframing of this, which is, why must we figure out how to live within the walled gardens of a bunch of corporations with their own priorities? Can't we think in the same way that we think about infrastructure in other spaces about what infrastructure means in AI? I don't have the answer. I've talked to some people who are asking those questions, and I would urge you to hold on to that question and actually us all to take that question and challenge into our future spaces, which is like, yes, we have to engage with the policies, yes, we have to understand the tools, but like, can't we build something better? And I think we can.
Thank you, Luke. Okay, on this side, please.
Hello. I work with older adults, and we're teaching them how to use technology. I work for Two Life Communities, and I manage a resident technology program there. And we have offered an extensive curriculum of courses that focused on how seniors can use various AI tools. And one avenue that we are planning to explore is basically encouraging seniors to use AI tools for socializing purposes. And I'm curious about research that is currently being done on whether or not AI tools are actually beneficial for seniors in terms of providing companionship. So I know that very little research has been done on this topic. The results seem to be somewhat contradictory at this point, but it's also hard to tell because more work needs to be done, more longitudinal studies need to be done. So my question is if you're aware of any research that we may be able to refer to.
Great, thank you. Victor?
I know it's happening. I don't know specifics, but I know there's companies, organizations that are building companion AIs, I guess is what you call them, avatars for mental health and for kind of being a therapist per se, giving you feedback and encouragement. There's some research on there, but some companies are working with researchers and others are just doing it on their own. You'd have to look into what the particular platform is and ask them whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that. I don't know of research in terms of academic research. I do know that there's market data and that some of the companies that are providing character-based AI or companion AI are some of the earliest profitable AI companies because the usage is so high. And so, I think there's a lot to unpack in the responsible development of these systems and how to develop that and whether or not, that's a path we want to go down in terms of digital companionship. But I do think there's also there's a loneliness epidemic in this country. Mental health resources are harder than ever to come by for many people. And so I think that if we can explore that space responsibly and with ethical oversight, it's certainly something worth investigating. And I think that when I reference the marketing, I mean, I think there's a real demand for it. And if you think about, loneliness and so on and so forth, like I don't find it surprising that those companies are finding early success.
And there's nothing stopping you from going out to, your state university or research and asking them, hey, do you have graduate students looking for a project? This is something that to look into. They'd be happy to. I mean, anything that's AI related right now is hot, so I'm sure you could get someone to start studying it if it doesn't exist already.
Yeah.
Luke, you want to jump in?
Sharon Strover isn't in the room, is she? Sharon's
She is. She's over here.
Sharon, do you have an answer to this question?
Could you repeat the question?
The question, if I sum it up, was research around AI interventions around loneliness or companionship for older adults. Is there any research on the sort of efficacy of any of those tools?
There's a lot of research on technology mediating relationships, not just AI technologies.
Here's a plug for Sharon. Sharon's a professor at UT Austin, proving Victor's point, and is leading one of a number of strands of AI-related work that UT is doing. So if you're curious about what research is out there or interested in some of the cutting-edge work, I encourage you to, sorry, Sharon, I just voluntold you. I encourage you to find Sharon.
A lot of work on social robots right now.
Yes.
Yeah, we're doing that at OSU, and AI is just the next step of that. So
I would also say there's almost definitely research in Japan on this topic, because the concept of companionship for the Asian population of Japan and technological interventions there, very popular. So if you're willing to look a little far afield, that might also be something to explore.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Come
you.
on this side.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stefano Solorio. I'm actually a founder of a company that creates AI for older adults.
That is serendipity. Wow.
And I can definitely share, we're trying to collaborate with the University of Miami to develop a generative AI, a digital literacy coach for older adults that's SMS and text-based. So that kind of eliminates the barrier to accessing ChatGPT and generative AI products for older adults. We work with health plans as well, the health systems, to kind of collaborate with the Medicare Advantage population. So definitely know a lot in the age tech space on working with AI, and I'm actually speaking at a conference in March about that. But anyways, I wanted to ask a light question, but I was going to ask you guys about what AI tools that you've used. Any fun ones, anything that you've generated. But yeah, I just wanted to say that. But I did not tee that up, but just that was very good timing, but just putting my plug, that's all.
That's a great question. Thank you. Who wants to offer?
I just want to congratulate you on being so patient during that entire exchange and not jumping in and you're like, excuse me.
I was like looking back at someone, I was like, she knows what I'm talking about. No, but this is my first time at the conference, and I'm hearing all these nonprofits as a for-profit side of it. Like, I think we could definitely collaborate, but yeah, there's so many resources out there already around AI and older adults. So,
Great.
But happy to hear your answer.
Thanks. I personally, so I use ChatGPT a lot. I use ChatGPT for kind of summarization, for asking for opposing viewpoints to a point I'm trying to make, to think if I've thought through kind of potential counterarguments. I use ChatGPT for things that are hard to Google, like, for instance, I was working on a sink this past weekend, and I had an aerator, and I was trying to figure out what kind of adapter I needed for it, and that's a thing you can take a picture of for ChatGPT and be like, what kind of adapter do I need for this? And that's very effective. So it's not super exciting, but actually very useful. And then I use a number of things for work, like we use a product that is kind of like ChatGPT internally. So I'm a pretty avid adopter, although I would say like I haven't found the constant usage all day, every day, just because my work doesn't afford that necessarily. And also I use autocomplete on my phone a lot. That's also AI driven. I use spell checkers, also AI driven. So like in many ways, we're all using, Grammarly. I don't use Grammarly actually. Anyway, longer conversation. But I think, you're interacting with AI in lots of ways already.
I think everybody uses ChatGPT. It's the easy in and what most people know. But I use ChatGPT for creating outlines for workshops with kids. It helps me just hit the major points, and then I can fill in all the expertise that I already have. It's like, yeah, that helps me organize my thoughts. How do I start? And I want a workshop on using AI to introduce the arts to underserved, underrepresented youth in 5th grade. I mean, this is the thing about natural language processing, right? You talk to it just like it would be a human being, but you have to be very specific. And the more specific you are, the more accurate it is. I've used it to tell it to act like Johann Sebastian Bach, and to answer me as if it were Bach in a historical figure, and talk to me about what is a fugue and how he used it in his music, and it will start acting like a historical figure. So you can use that in education, I was part of a space international online thing that we had on Nikola Tesla. So I used ChatGPT to help me write a song about Nikola Tesla, and then it gave me some starting points, and then I fixed it and then changed some of the words to fit a little bit better because it wasn't exactly right. But there's some software that can actually create not just the lyrics, but the song in any music style that you want. That's some pretty wild stuff, and mix different musical genres. So I'm looking to use that with students to have them play around with it.
The Weird Al of drones, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's one thing that it won't replace, because that creativity. AI does not have the ability to put drones with music, with aviation, with STEAM and art creativity, and use it in a mariachi STEAM camp, right? I mean, it's like, it will never think of that. This is where humans have that advantage.
But
I could leverage it, right? I could leverage it and get students interested in learning about science, technology, engineering, and math by the results that these tools are able to give them, without having to have all those years of training, that technical skill, and show them that the real creativity is up here in their mind, right? If they can think it, then they can produce it.
Perfect, thank you, Victor. Okay, question on this side, please.
Oh, I wanted to hear the rest, but we can talk about that. So I'm in corporate responsibility. I work for Ernst & Young, EY, but we design a lot of curriculum for youth in all ages, and then deliver them to nonprofits for free. So it's a wonderful, we do amazing things. But and I'm very optimistic for myself, my family, because I'm educated, I'm aware, I'm reading, I think it will solve, or has the ability to solve, the most critical problems of our planet, our environmental status, and the biosciences. I just want to share this because there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic. But my concern is for our youth and the changing workforce. So myself, I'm an adult. I'm very excited for the future of my work life, but what is your perspective on teaching children and youth? What will they go to school for? And what are their prospects? What will their life look like? What's your perspective on that?
I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Luke has ideas as well. But I think it's a difficult question. I think it's really important to make sure that kids use the tools that are available to them when they're available. So, I was reflecting on the fact that, like, when I first learned to do any kind of research, I learned the Dewey Decimal System. Yeah, I have white hair. And does anybody use the Dewey Decimal System now? Probably not. Like, there might be people in the room that's never even heard of it. And then the internet came along, and we did all our research on the internet. And now, there's generative AI. And, what's really exciting about tools like that is that if you know how to use it safely, then you can, produce things with more ease, just as I was able to do when I went from using the Dewey Decimal System to using the internet. Were there concerns for using the internet? Sure. but like we had to like learn to use it safely. And so I think there's that. There's the extra layer is that like I'm hopeful that in the use of AI within the context of education, we start to push towards, and we've been pushing towards this for a long time, which is like we don't go to school to just learn like the outputs, like okay, 2 + 2 is 4, but like the why of like addition, right? Like the why of math, how to use it to answer questions. What kind of questions do we answer with math? Like that's the interesting, and I think like that analysis will be like really powerful for our students to have. And if we can harness this tool to be another tool like calculators, like the advent of the internet, to be a tool that students can use so that they can use their wonderful human brains in really exciting ways, I think that would be really smart. Also, I think it potentially gives the ability of teachers to be able to focus in on kids and do the human act of teaching, right? Like really focus in on how to support them, how to scaffold them, pay attention to social emotional learning. These are things that like AI probably doesn't do quite as well. So it's really important that like maybe AI creates space for teachers. And I know Luke has thoughts on that.
I'd like to add to that, which I agree 100% with all of that. One quick piece of data for you. The industry, the occupation where we have seen the fastest and most uptake of generative AI is computer programmers, which AI is very good at generating working code because partially it's developed by computer scientists, like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? But also, if you think about that, it's counterintuitive. Like, that's what they do. They write code for a living, and yet they're like, now I don't have to write all this code. I can just think about what do I want the computer to do, get the code writing part out of the way, because that was always just a means to an end. That was always a way to get to the thing you wanted to build. Writing code for code's sake doesn't have a lot of value. So I think that there's an interesting nugget in there that the people whose like jobs is most easily replicated by some of these models are where you're also seeing the most voluntary uptake and the most enthusiastic uptake, because it allows you to focus on the human components and the critical thinking components.
Thank you. Wait, this side.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne, and I work with local leaders a lot, and we hear needs from them like, oh, I need help with cybersecurity, learning about how to do right passwords and stuff. And it's really easy to pass that off as that's a local issue, that's a rural issue, until you watch these congressional hearings around social media. And so my question for you guys today is a two-part one. Do you know of any initiatives aimed at building these digital skills education in our political leaders and our policymakers? And two, how do we walk the line there between education and advocacy?
I still know political leaders who have their assistants print out their emails. So, Amina, would you like to take it?
Yes.
I mean, some of this has been reported on. Like, there's been an effort fairly bipartisanly on this topic in Congress to try and raise the level of sort of knowledge, precisely because of the importance of this issue. So, like, I think that is true, and much like digital equity in our community, there are some early adopters, and there are some people who are up to speed, and there are some people who are a little behind, and there are some people who refuse to recognize that there's any issue. But like, I think they're trying. I mean, I think our leaders are trying and understand the significance of this, and see their own education in a collaborative way as crucial. So I've been heartened by that, because I think that's exactly what you need to do when facing something of this. So, something that's momentous. So if I can leave you with a little bit of optimism around that, like, that's a kind of encouraging thing, and I think you could probably Google around and find some public reporting about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been, like, broadly speaking, like a lot of different types of listening sessions that have been led by members of Congress to say, like, we don't know what we're dealing with here, so please educate us. So like that's a big piece of what's been going on. There's been like follow-ups to that where they're pulling in academics and researchers, not just industry and advocates. I know that the White House has launched like a new initiative where they're pulling together like a team that's focused on understanding this. So like there's definitely like folks in government that are trying to wrap their around where they need to engage. That doesn't mean that like all of us in the room can be like, good, phew, I don't need to do anything. Because I do think that like as with any kind of political issue, like industry can show up a lot and lobby really hard. And so for like the pieces of what you want to see in like a safe and healthy AI policy, like I think it's going to be important to be heard. So like, I mean, there might be like really wonky moments where we'll need folks, real people, to show up to members of Congress to say like, I care about data minimization. I care about data privacy. Like I care about making sure that whatever audits or whatever like rules that we put in place apply not just to the program like ChatGPT, but also to the underlying model like GPT, like, right? So I think like there are going to be moments where we're going to get in the weeds. And so like I think it goes both ways. Like I think policymakers need to be educated, and we have to be willing to like fight for these new rights potentially, or like new policies with the terms that matter. And so like we'll need to educate ourselves on like what are the sort of like technical pieces that actually matter.
Thank you, Amina. James.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. I'm James Neal from the Institute of Museum and Library Services in Washington, D.C. I'm a librarian by training. I've been at IMLS for 7+ years, and I've been paying attention to artificial intelligence probably for 5 or 6 years. One of the things that I have been watching is we would see trickles of applications that came in for grants related to artificial intelligence and libraries. Most of them were half-baked or very pie in the sky or just very exploratory without any practical impact or value. Over the past 2 years, we saw a floodgate open with the rise of AI in our society. I also realized there's a lot of hype from the industry and from those who are advocating for this new and emerging technology. What I'm most concerned about is the role that librarians and libraries can play. And we spoke to this earlier, Angela, with regard to the technology being so fast-moving. And unlike many other emergent technologies, this one is definitely moving way too fast and too hard to capture. But how does digital literacy and digital skills training take place with such an elusive and volatile area? Thank you.
Right. I think this might be an Amina question.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be something that is moving fast and changing fast. And so it does put pressure on this community, on libraries, on anyone doing digital navigation work to retrain themselves so that they can be prepared to like answer the questions of their community. I think that's hard. I mean, like, I can tell you our ratings and reviews, we came out, and then the day we came out, like, a new product came out. And just a few weeks ago, like, another new product came out. Like, so it's really hard to keep up because of the pace that it's moving at. And so, finding institutions that are willing to keep going back and iterating on their ratings, their research, their review, their understanding, their toolkits, I think will be really important because you will need to do that yourselves. And there's really no way around it.
Right. Luke?
So two plugs. So one is I actually think, from my experience in libraries, a lot of libraries are sort of eager for this. Not all of them, but many of them have, over the last 10 years, moved from teaching, how do you turn on your computer, to social media applications, to how do you use a creative suite, to how do you do 3D printing and design and sale, to how do you do computer programming. And I think there's going to be a space for that. The second thing is I want to give a plug for a National Day of AI Literacy that actually we're going to launch on April 19th. Two of the founding partners are Common Sense Media and Innovate EDU. The website is AI Day of Literacy. AI Literacy?
Day, yeah.
AILiteracyDay.org. You can go and sign up. That's going to be a day where we're going to try and provide curriculum and resources for an introduction to folks about this technology. So if you put your name down, we'll be following up with sort of resources or tools that you could run in your own communities to start to introduce these ideas. Because as overwhelming as the sort of mass of new tools and new technologies can feel, like we have some very basic lessons to start to communicate to people to sort of introduce them. And that's kind of where we're starting. And the sort of the nearest alligator to the boat is just, what is this tool? How might I think about it? What are some of the challenges? Where does it show up in my community? And we want to, in a fun and safe way, start to provide resources for folks trying to figure that out.
And NDIA will participate in that. We will help, encourage the conversation amongst our community around what to do with, just as we do with not just. We will do a tiny bit of what we do at Digital Inclusion Week around this as we understand what the interest is from NDIA's community. Okay, on this side, please.
My name is Ron West from Digitunity. We're a national nonprofit focused on device access. You talked a little bit about consumer protections, and I'm really interested in protections for writers and artists and some of the people whose work is being used to train the AIs that you're talking about. Do you see a future where that kind of equity for both the sources of a lot of this information is possible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, in the past week, 2 large open source models that rely on fully open source data sets that have permissions to use all the data have been released. One was by the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence called ALMO, and the other is by an organization called Cohere, and it's called Aya. So do I see a future? Yes. Do I see that as the only future? Probably not. And I think that that's being litigated right now, and that's being kind of investigated in the courts and so on. I do think that what we can do is encourage vote with our feet, or I guess I don't know the right appendage name here, but use the models that we feel are developed responsibly and with the rights and creative licenses well thought out and obtained and so on. But I think until there's a real decision from regulatory bodies, it's unlikely. I think that will emerge on its own. That's just my own very honest take.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think without pressure on companies to take a step to actually support artists' rights and be thoughtful about the training data that they're using, I think they can operate the way they're operating, and so they will operate the way they're operating. And so, again, there's a plethora of ideas out there. There are bills that are being, introduced. How far they'll go really depends on all of us to be saying, I really care about artist rights. I want to know whether or not watermarking will actually work, right? I think being heard on these issues now is really important because these concepts are being introduced, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, as potential bills to try to protect artist rights and come up with different ways to do that. And so I would definitely, feel free to reach out to me. I would definitely pay attention to this space because I think it will, if it goes forward, I think it, will have an impact on good and bad on how artists can use their likeness, their content, their work. If it doesn't go forward, then you're going to need to find other pressure points in order to get organizations to be able to treat the work appropriately.
Super, thank you. Question on this side.
Hi, Susan Krautbauer from Digitunity, and I brought some notes because in an acronym-heavy world, I want to make sure I say these correctly. One of the things that I think is a superpower of NDIA and the people represented in this room, and that is the ability and the knowledge to understand that cross-collaboration is key. And what I wanted to do is almost a pitch or a piece of advice. There's been so many great questions about PII, personally identifiable information, unconscious bias. There's a million things that are happening, and what I want us to be in our radar is that the ONC, which is the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information and Technology, as well as the QHIN and many other things in the health sector, they are dealing with this they're dealing with generative AI and putting together regulations and measurements and things like that that are going to address some, but not all, of what it concerns us in our industry here. And I do believe that it's really going to be really important for us to look wide and make sure, we've heard over and over in every one of these sessions, let's not recreate the wheel. So let's partner up with these folks. There is a plug for an affinity group that's going to be going on right after this with a subject matter expert in health, and that is Amy Sheehan. And if anyone's interested, I don't know if generative AI is going to be a part of that discussion, but I would like you, if you are aware of those efforts that are happening and what you might be able to weigh in on, what currently you may be aware of in that sector that could dovetail with what we're looking at today.
Great,
thank you.
Anyone want to respond?
I will just say one thing, which is yes, and this is actually a point I make a lot in the employment space. Like, just because AI and generative AI are new doesn't erase the fact that we have decades of anti-discrimination law and employment law in this country that we have a foundation already built. And so sometimes I think when we talk about it being wide open, I think that's semi-true in some spaces, but I think in other spaces there's an existing body of both case law and kind of regulatory requirements that we can build on top of. So I guess I just say that because yes, I think there is cross-fertilization that can happen, and also to maybe not feel like we're completely starting from scratch as well. So.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll do one last question and then final comments from our panelists, please.
Hi, my name is Andrea Bingtonia. I'm with Smart Columbus from Columbus, Ohio. And our organization focuses a lot around human-centered technology design and deployments in collaboration with community partners. And something I'm interested in is knowing a little bit more about the opportunities to create human-AI partnerships that are a bit more proactive than reactive, and what we can do as people who are not artificial intelligence experts, and maybe never will be. How can we leverage AI as a tool to help solve problems that we are discovering with our communities?
Good question.
Yeah, so one of my favorite, this sort of harkens back to the sort of what tools do you use. So a lot of the tools right now are really consumer facing, like you're the just user. But some of the really fun things that I've been able to sort of demo through colleagues are, and that are sort of what GPT, OpenAI calls their agents tool, is like about building technology tools on top of the ChatGPT. So I've been in sessions where teachers created tools to create original stories focused on phonemic pairs that students need to work on topics that are specifically interesting to that student. So a teacher couldn't create 25 fiction stories focused on the specific phonemic challenge that their individual students need on a topic that the student was interested in, but actually they can, like this, sort of building on top of, building with some of these tools. So one is kind of a plug for sort of tools and technologies that empower us as creators, not just as consumers. I'd also give a plug for those tools as sort of really useful teaching tools, because I think it's actually way more powerful, in teaching tech to sort of give people the ability to sort of roll up their sleeves and play in a sandbox, as opposed to just kind of query it as an end user and subject. So I think it's coming. I think some of those tools are out there. Some more are coming, and we should look for them exactly in the way you suggested, so that people can bring their own curiosity and their own problems and solve for those. And that's, I think, way more interesting than just what a large company sort of thought my needs were as a teacher, as a parent, as a consumer, as an individual, as a Luke or whatever. And just, sorry, I misspoke earlier. So that AI Day of Literacy, Innovate EDU is one of the partners, but the EdSafe AI Alliance that NDIA is a part of is one of the partners. So just forgive me for the misspoke.
I was going to say, one of the things that's really interesting is that, like, it sounds complicated to be producers, right? But, like, that's what is interesting about generative AI, and I think that's what brings us all to the room, is that, like, it makes the act of building a tool really easy. You can use just like normal language to be able to build a tool. And the idea that, like, because at first it's like, oh, a teacher has to like learn how to build a tool and then they're going to use that tool. That seems like a lot. But I think what's exciting about generative AI is that, like, it's possible through some of these tools to be able to build tools really easily. And then you can build what you need bespoke, like whenever you need it, and get the answers, like Luke was saying, like really quickly. And I think that is like, you don't have to be a tech person or a computer science person. Like, you don't have to be an engineer. You can just use the tool to answer the question you need.
Yeah, I should say, so the person who built that, like the interface, there was no lines of code. They wrote like 100 words in plain text, and the technology, because it's a language model, like interpreted it and then delivered it. I sat using the same tool after dinner with my father, who's a retired history teacher, and my daughter, who's a second grader. And I created a tool to answer questions about the Declaration of Independence. I uploaded the Declaration of Independence. I told the chatbot, only answer it based on this document. Ask the user what grade level they sort of read about, and give them 3 prompts of questions that they can ask about. And in the span of 5 minutes after dinner, I built a little chatbot to explain something my dad cares a lot about in a language that my daughter can understand. Like, that's not changing the world or sort of transforming anything, but it is illustrative of like the power of the technology and some of the ways in which it works that are different than how we've come to understand what it means to program a technology or be a developer. And frankly, to the point we made earlier, like, that's a radical democratization in a really powerful way if you think about what coding skills has historically meant for who gets to write technology programs and who doesn't. So if you're looking for a reason for optimism, or a reason at least to be curious about the technology, I kind of give you that one.
Awesome. Okay, we're almost at time. So 1 minute or less, closing statement.
So
We are out of,
No,
we are
sorry.
just, actually, I'm really sorry, David. Really, really sorry, David. Parent of Digital Equity Act. Okay, Trey.
Can I give my, no, I'm very, actually, despite the penalty, I'm very optimistic for many of the reasons that Luke just mentioned as well. But from a job seeking perspective, I think it enables access to a set of tools and services that were only available to like upper middle class people. So for instance, you might say, I really want to learn how to work in field X. Can you give me a learning plan that I can learn on? I really want to interview for this job, but I'm afraid I'm going to fail the interview. Can you give me some interview questions I can practice with and then grade my answers and tell me how I can improve? Can you read my resume and tell me if it's like getting the message that I want to give across? Can I just practice my interview like questions and answers with you over and over? Can you tell me how to negotiate a salary increase? All of these things that are previously kind of only available to people who had the means and privilege to access them are becoming very, very widely available at like reasonably high quality. And so I think overlooking that would be a mistake, and I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Perfect, thank you. Victor?
Right there with you, the optimism, especially with youth and underserved, underrepresented youth. They have the opportunity not just to level up, but maybe even leapfrog, because of the democratization of this technology. As long as it's guided in a safe and culturally respectful way, the potential is huge. This technology, you can be used as your tutor to teach you basically anything you want to learn, right? We don't have to actually do the Google search or go to YouTube. You can personalize your education to your interest and your needs, and sky's the limit, really.
Thank you. Amina?
Yeah, I mean, I think like my last words to you all would be like, I think there's a really exciting moment that it's not going to go away. So like, definitely arm yourselves with, I think, some basics so that you can support your community. I think it'll be an interesting moment to see what your community needs, how they want to use these tools, and then find ways to build like the resources that they need to be able to do that even better. And then like last, I think that like it'll be an opportunity for this community, as Angela has said a few times, for us to be able to sort of like feedback to policymakers as they're thinking about this, actively thinking about like, what are the rules and regulations, what are the policies we should put in place, to say like, here's what we're nervous about, here's what my community is nervous about, here's what they're worried about, here are things that they don't want to encounter when they use this thing that they feel like they really need to use. So like, how do we protect them? It's okay to ask questions of policymakers. You don't have to have an answer for them to then, put in place. So like, I think even just being able to lift up concerns and questions from your community will be really valuable to that process.
Thank you. Luke?
When the internet was being built, or when the web browser was introduced, or when the iPhone came out, like this community did not exist in this way. We were not here, we were not together, we were not having this conversation. And in some ways all of those technologies evolved in our absence. And if there's a reason that gives me hope and optimism that, that humans in this transformation have a good shot, it's all of us together in rooms having these conversations, figuring things out, and charting a path towards a better and brighter future. So that's what gives me hope, and why I'm so happy to be here with all of you.
Perfect. Can we get a big hand for this panel?